Through the first half of 1979, the most interest an ordinary American savings account was permitted to pay was 5.25%. That same year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics measured consumer prices rising 11.3%. Not the most that account did pay. The most it was allowed to pay at a savings and loan, which was the best rate legally available anywhere in the country. At a commercial bank, the limit was lower still, 5%. Flat. Those were legal maximums set by federal banking regulators under a rule known as Regulation Q and its counterparts at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Federal Home Loan Bank Board. A bank could pay less. No bank could pay more. So the safest place a family could put money was guaranteed, by rule, to lose roughly 5.5% of its purchasing power in a year. That was not a bad decision, and it was not a market that turned. It was a ceiling written into federal regulation. Which leaves one question, and this whole story is the answer to it. If the account at the bank was certain to lose, where did the money actually go? Take a representative household, of the kind the Bureau of Labor Statistics built its urban family budgets around. The figures that follow are illustrative, assembled from published averages rather than lifted from one family's book. On the savings line, $900 sitting in a Passbook account at the Savings and Loan on the main street of town. A Passbook was a physical object, a little booklet with the bank's name on the cover, and every time you deposited or withdrew, a teller ran it through a machine that printed the new balance in a column. You could hold your entire savings history in one hand. That $900, earning the maximum the law allowed, made about $47 over a year. Across that same year, prices rose enough that it took roughly $1,001 to buy what $900 had bought 12 months earlier. The family did everything right. They saved, they left it alone, they collected every dollar of interest the account could legally produce, and they finished the year about $54 behind where they started. The obvious objection is the right one. If the account was losing, why not move the money somewhere it could earn? Because for most of the decade, the places where money could earn were closed to households that size. The ceiling was not written to hurt anybody. Regulation Q came out of the Banking Act of 1933 in the wreckage of the Depression. The theory was that banks competing for deposits would bid interest rates up against each other, take on risky loans to cover the cost, and fail, which is roughly what a great many of them had just finished doing. So Congress handed the Federal Reserve the power to cap what banks could pay depositors, and the first ceiling was set at 3% in November of 1933. For 30 years, it hardly mattered. When market rates sit below a cap does nothing. The Federal Reserve's own history of the rule reaches for 1936 to make the point. Treasury bills that year paid under 1/4%, against a ceiling of 2.5%. It was a number nobody was near. Then, market rates started climbing, and the ceiling stopped being decoration and became a wall. The Federal Reserve raised the Passbook maximum for commercial banks from 4.5% to 5%, effective the 1st of July, 1973, and to 5.25% 6 years later. Short-term market rates over that same stretch ran to 10, then 12, and past 14 by 1980. There is a name for what happens next: disintermediation. It means money walking out of banks. The intermediary, the bank sitting between the saver and the borrower, gets cut out because the saver can do better going directly to the market. But notice who could go directly and who could not. A United States Treasury bill required $10,000 to buy. It had not always. The Treasury raised the minimum denomination from $1,000 to $10,000 effective the auction of the 2nd of March, 1970, announced in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's own circular that February. And among the stated purposes was discouraging small investors from bidding. Whatever the intent, the effect was a door with a $10,000 lock on it. The Census Bureau put median household income in the United States in 1978 at $15,060. so the minimum ticket to market rates was about 2/3 of a typical family's entire pre-tax annual income, in cash sitting spare. The government did eventually build a door for savers, and it had the same lock on it. Effective the 1st of June, 1978, banks and savings and loans were authorized to offer a 6-month money market certificate. Its ceiling was reset every week against the average discount rate at the most recent auction of 6-month Treasury bills, which meant that for the first time a deposit could pay something close to the market. The Federal Reserve Bulletin printed the opening week 7.16% at commercial banks, 7.41 at the thrifts, 2 full points above the Passbook ceiling, and the first honest deal a saver had been offered in years. The minimum deposit was $10,000, locked up for 26 weeks. So the escape hatch was real, and it opened at a height most households could not reach. A family with $900 was looking at a market whose smallest available ticket cost 11 times what they had. Meanwhile, the banks had a problem of their own, and their solution is the strangest artifact this rule produced. A bank in 1979 badly wanted deposits and was forbidden from competing on interest because every bank was pinned to the identical ceiling. So it competed on everything else. Banks gave things away. One of the best documented versions ran at the Republic National Bank of New York, and we know the details because the bank's executive vice president, Jeffrey Keel, laid them out for a House subcommittee investigating the rule in 1979. In that year, a depositor could hand over $1,475, agree not to touch it for 3.5 years, and walk out with a 17-inch RCA color television. The same amount left for 5.5 years, got a 25-inch set. $950, tied up 5.5 years, got a stereo with built-in disco lights. In 1978 alone, that one bank handed out more than $2.65 million worth of merchandise. It had been doing this for a decade. Republic was known around New York as the TV Bank, was briefly one of the largest color television distributors in the country, and since 1970 had run a 4-year certificate called the Bonus Bond, on which the depositor chose merchandise instead of interest. That is the whole rule in one transaction. The interest the bank was not permitted to pay in dollars, it paid in furniture. The rate war never stopped. It moved into the appliance department, and the household that took the television had accepted its interest in a single lump, in advance, in a form that could not compound and would be worth less every year it sat in the living room. Which brings us to where the money actually went, because households were not sitting still. Start with the account that made the least sense and eventually the most. The Christmas Club was invented in 1909 by Merkel Landis, treasurer of the Carlyle Trust Company in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The first one enrolled about 350 members, holding an average of $28 apiece, and the money was paid out on the 1st of December. You committed to depositing a fixed small amount every week, and the accounts characteristically charged you for taking it out early. These were never built to earn. From January of 1967, the Federal Reserve treated Christmas and vacation club accounts under the same rules as savings deposits, so a bank was free to pay the full passbook rate on one. Where interest was paid at all, it ran at or below that rate, and the withdrawal charges routinely ate it. Against prices rising 11%, a Christmas club barely held its ground, and millions of households kept one anyway. They were buying something an interest rate does not measure. A Christmas club converted an amount that would have evaporated in ordinary weekly spending into an amount that existed in December. Whether that was worth the foregone interest is a question about a household's life, not about finance. An arrangement that needed no institution at all worked on the same principle, and the archives are quietest about it. The rotating savings club is ancient, and it turns up worldwide under different names. Caribbean and Caribbean American families call it a partner or a Susu. In Haiti, it is a sol. In Guyana, a box hand. The structure is fixed. A group of people who know each other each contribute the same amount on the same day every week, and each week the entire pot goes to one member. The order is set at the start. When everyone has taken a turn, the cycle ends and often begins again. The numbers are ordinary. 12 members, $10 a week, and every week one of them takes home $120. Over the full cycle, each member pays in $120 and takes out $120. Nobody earns a cent of interest, and as a savings product, the stated return is exactly zero. But that is not the whole calculation. Under 11% inflation, when you receive money, matters nearly as much as how much. The member who draws the pot in week 1 is holding a full cycle's saving at the start, in dollars that still buy what dollars bought. The member who draws it last has saved in money that shrank the whole way down. I think that is the most underrated thing about these clubs. They do not create a return. They move time around from the members who can afford to wait to the members who cannot, and in an inflation, time is the expensive thing. That is my own reading of a well-documented practice, not a figure from a Federal Reserve table. A household with a job that came with a credit union had a better door than either. A credit union is not a bank. It is a cooperative owned by its members, usually joined through an employer or a parish or a trade, and money put into one is not technically a deposit at all. It buys shares, and what it pays is not interest, but a dividend. Because they sat outside Regulation Q, credit unions were allowed to pay up to 7% on a regular share account, at a time when a commercial bank was capped at 5% and a savings and loan at 5.25%. Whether any particular credit union paid the full 7% is not something the record establishes, but the permission was 2 full points better than a bank's, and access to it had nothing to do with financial sophistication. It depended entirely on where you worked. And then came the instrument that broke the whole arrangement. At the start of the decade, Bruce Bent and Henry B. R. Brown built the first money market mutual fund, the Reserve Fund, organized in 1970 and opened to the public by 1972. The idea was almost insultingly simple. If a Treasury bill requires $10,000, pool 1,000 small savers together, buy the bills as one large buyer, and hand each saver a proportional slice of the market rate. A fund is not a bank. It takes no deposits. Regulation Q had no authority over it whatsoever. For years, it barely registered. 2 economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, writing in 1979, put money market fund assets in a range of $3 to $4 billion until late 1977. Then market rates climbed away from the ceiling. The gap became impossible to ignore, and the money moved. In the first 5 months of 1979, those funds took in more than $2 billion a month. That is disintermediation with a face on it. The family that could not reach a $10,000 Treasury bill could reach a money market fund, and once they could, the Passbook account had no argument left to make. Now follow what that did to the institutions on the other side of the counter, because it is the half of this story that usually gets dropped. The savings and loans were the intended beneficiaries of the whole arrangement. When Congress extended the ceilings to them in September of 1966, it deliberately set their limit a 1/4 point above the commercial banks, so that deposits would flow toward the institutions that funded American mortgages, and their balance sheets had a fault line running through them. They held 30-year mortgages written years earlier at 6 to 8%, while the money funding those mortgages was short-term deposits that could leave any day. When market rates went to double digits, the savings and loans were earning single digits on a loan book they could not reprice, and needed to pay far more than that to keep deposits from walking. They could not. The ceiling forbade it, and their mortgage income could not have covered it anyway. The $900 leaving that passbook was, on the other side of the ledger, part of what was funding somebody's mortgage, and it was leaving because the law would not let the institution pay to keep it. The rule, written to protect them, had trapped them. The unwinding was signed on the 31st of March, 1980, When President Jimmy Carter signed the Depository Institutions Deregulation and Monetary Control Act, Public Law 96-221, it created a body called the Depository Institutions Deregulation Committee and instructed it to phase out the interest rate ceilings as fast as conditions allowed. It raised federal deposit insurance from $40,000 to $100,000. It let credit unions and savings and loans offer checkable accounts. The ceilings finished coming off on the 31st of March, 1986. The regulation Q limit on savings deposits had lasted 53 years, and by the time it was lifted, the money it governed had already left. There is no ceiling now, and the comparison is worth making precisely. In July of 2026, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation put the national average rate on a savings account at 0.38%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics measured consumer prices in June, rising 3.5% over the year. A saver today is losing ground too, by about 3 points, instead of the 5.5 that the household in 1979 was losing at 5.25 against 11.3. The difference is not the direction. It is that today's gap is the outcome of a market, and theirs was the text of a regulation. For most of the 1970s, an ordinary American household was not permitted to be paid a fair rate on its savings. That is a strange sentence, and it is the accurate one. The loss was not a punishment for spending too much or saving too little. It was the arithmetic of a rule written in 1933 to solve a problem that no longer existed, colliding with a decade nobody had designed it for. The households inside it were not passive. They joined Christmas clubs that paid almost nothing because the discipline was worth more to them than the interest. If a job came with a credit union, they took it. They ran savings clubs among people they trusted, where the only thing being handed out was the order of who got to be early. Some of them took the television. What they could not do until very late was simply be paid for saving. 53 years of a rule, and for most of 1 decade inside it, knowing how to save was not the part that was allowed to help. If your family kept a passbook or ran a club like that, the year and the number are worth putting in the comments. This channel gets built out of those ledgers.